Hey guys, this video has been a very long time in the making. Today, I'm going to be doing a Windows 11 review, but this video is a little bit unique because instead of getting it from a Windows fanboy's perspective, you're going to be getting it from a Linux user's perspective. In other words, the perspective of a person that doesn't use Windows every day and, quite frankly, hates Windows 10 with a passion. So what I'm going to be doing is, I've already got my hands on a Windows 11 ISO. I'm going to be installing it in a virtual machine and playing around with it, seeing like what has improved or disproved or stayed the same. And I'll be specifically looking at the areas that I mostly care about as a Linux user that I really want to see Windows improve on. And of course, I'll be documenting my experiences as I go. But without further ado, let's get right into it.
Alright, so now what I have here is a virtual machine set up with the Windows 11 ISO, and all I have to do is boot it up, and it should boot straight to the installer. Alright, now we get to the Windows setup screen, and I'm gonna go set my time and currency format to English Canada. And by the way, I just want to comment that like this scroll bar, when you click on it, the inside part of it widens, but like this part, like the outer part of it, stays the same size, which kind of defeats the point of this animation, but okay. And also, you got like Windows 95 themes mixed in with XP themes here, mixed in with Windows 7, and then you get a little bit of Windows 11. Pick a paradigm here. Like, this is extremely inconsistent. Like, if I had to describe the UX inconsistency of Windows in one picture, I could literally take a screenshot right now. Like, look at this mouse cursor. Like, it's from Windows 95, clearly. Now, I get it, we're in the installer, and yes, the mouse cursor will change to a more modern one once we get into actual Windows 11, but I still thought that was worth mentioning. This actually makes me appreciate the UX consistency of Linux. Like, you can apply a theme, and for the most part, it'll get applied to all your applications, and most of your applications, like all the ones that ship with your distro, and most of the applications that you download from your package manager, all of them will follow the same theme. And there's some software that deviates from that, of course, but for the most part, all the software on Linux follows the same theming. This is not the case here. But anyway, let's go click next, and then install now. Alright, and it's going to immediately ask us for a product key. Now, I don't have a Windows license on hand, so I'm going to click I don't have a product key. And it doesn't really matter anyway, since I'm not really planning on digging into a whole lot of personalization, and I think I'm just going to completely wipe out this VM after I'm finished, so it doesn't really matter anyways. And I'm going to select Windows 10 Pro, and the reason for that is so that way we can skip having to create a Microsoft account, because if we go with the Home Edition, it actually requires us to create a Microsoft account, and no, you can't get around that by not connecting to the internet, as this also requires internet. Now Microsoft is starting to really force Microsoft accounts on home users. Sure, at least as far as I know, you can switch to a local account after setting up your system, but you don't have a Microsoft account and you really don't want to create one? No Windows 11 for you if you went with the Home Edition. That's one thing that I just really don't like about Windows, is Microsoft forcing certain things like Microsoft accounts on its users. But anyway, let's go click next, and I'm gonna accept the license agreement. And since we don't have any Windows version already installed on this virtual machine, we're gonna click custom, install Windows only, and then we need to create a new partition. Now we need to fill up the whole drive with it, so like this will do it. I'm gonna go click apply, and then okay. And I've given this virtual machine 64 gigabytes, which is the bare minimum to install Windows 11. But anyway, let's go click next to install it on that big partition. That's almost 64 gigs. Not quite, because some of the space is taken up by smaller essential partitions. But anyway, now it's gonna go install Windows 11. So now this will take a while, so I'll speed this up. Alright, so now Windows 11 has just finished installing, and now I'm in the setup process. So I'm going to select my country, which is Canada, and now it's asking me to select my keyboard layout. I use the US keyboard, and we don't need to add another layout. And by the way, I just can't help but notice that the Windows installer, other than branding and a little bit of theming on the scroll bars, hasn't really changed since Windows 8 was released. Like, honestly, if I had a Windows 8 installer, a Windows 10 installer, and a Windows 11 installer, I think it'd be really hard to tell the difference between the three. But anyway, I know this is a virtual machine, so it's not really fair to judge speed and stability, but I'm finding the setup process is going awfully slow. Like, you don't notice it because of video editing, but every time I click next, once I've done a setup prompt, it takes a little while to go to the next setup prompt, and I'm not quite sure what this is doing here, because Windows doesn't tell you for whatever reason. It's just like, don't turn off your PC, we're getting it ready. I do wish it would tell you, okay, how are you getting it ready? But anyway, let's name our device, and we need to actually follow these restrictions, so we can't contain only numbers. No more than 15 characters. That's kind of a weird requirement, but okay. And for whatever reason, we can't use any of these characters because Windows. Actually, Windows has a similar restriction to this on file names too. I find when it comes to naming things like files and the device name, I find Windows is the most restrictive on what characters you can use. But anyway, I'm gonna name this Win11, which is what I named this VM on creation, and then I'm gonna click next, since otherwise I think it'll just generate a name with a random string of letters and numbers, preceded by something like desktop, if I know Windows. And of course, that could have changed with Windows 11, but I haven't really had time to try that out. And for whatever reason, the system just restarted. And by the way, that text you see up at the top of the VM display is just part of the virtual BIOS, so you won't notice this if you install Windows 11 on bare metal. Alrighty, now that we're back to our setup process, we can actually set this up for personal use, then click next. I wonder how linking your system to an online account just because a company tells you that it's important to somehow gives you more control over your device. I don't understand. But anyway, let's click next, and then it's going to ask us to sign into our Microsoft account. However, with the Pro version, we don't have to do that. I'm actually going to scroll down to sign in options. It'll give us options to sign in with a security key. If you're that kind of person, sure, go do that. But the question I have is, where are we going to put the security key? In one of my desk drawers? And then if it gets found, then my computer gets hacked, which would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the security key, but okay. But anyway, I'm going to click offline account, and I do wonder what the forgot my username option does. I don't know, I'll have to try it out later. For now, I kind of want to go through this setup process, and then I don't know what this and wherever thing is for, and wherever what. Anyway, now it's going to actually persuade us to go back and sign up for a Microsoft account. It says, your account, your data more secure. After reading this, I still don't quite understand how linking to an online account makes you more secure. Yes, you can update your password from any device from afar, which can actually be a security disadvantage when you think about it. And you can review your privacy and security settings from afar. Again, can be a security advantage or a disadvantage when you think about it, but I don't know. I really don't understand this. And I wonder how you would not know if you have a Microsoft account. I guess if you're upgrading from Windows 10 and you had someone else set up your device for you, then I could see why. But anyway, I'm gonna go skip the Microsoft account. And notice how it says skip for now, like it's inevitable. Well, I think I'm just gonna completely wipe out this VM after I'm finished, so not in my case. And then I'm gonna just enter my name here. And it's even saying there's an even better option, use an online account. No, and it even does this in the password screen. I'm gonna go set a password real quick, and then we need to confirm it. Oh, okay, I actually forgot about this. Now it's still trying to get me to link to a Microsoft account. I forgot that it'll force you to make security questions. Can I skip this? No. So actually, the way to bypass this is to go back and then not set a password here, but then after you complete the setup process, make sure to go to settings and set up a password then, and then at that point it won't force you to set up security questions. But I mean, now we need to go set up privacy settings. That's another thing I really don't appreciate about Windows, is that to allow you to preserve at least some of your privacy, you need to opt out of everything manually, and that means scrolling down, and it won't even let you opt out of all diagnostic data. There are ways to get around that, but they are intentionally cumbersome, and the hope is that most users will just not bother, and that's just really corrupt in my opinion. But anyway, I'm gonna go through this manually. At least it's not like it takes a full hour, like it really only takes me like 1 or 2 minutes out of my life, but still. And then it's gonna go check for updates. And by the way, if you're wondering why my VM's display is not scaled properly, it's because I don't have VM drivers just yet, but I will get those installed after the Windows setup process, which will be after this whole rigmarole that lasts for about a few minutes. Not really sure why Windows even has to do this, and what really doesn't help is that it doesn't tell you what exactly it's doing. Okay, how exactly are you getting my desktop ready? I don't understand. But I'm gonna let this whole rigmarole go, and then we'll come right back. Alrighty, so now we're at our Windows 11 desktop, and before we dive any further into this, the very first thing I gotta do is go get my VM drivers installed so that way we can get this scaled properly, and it'll run at least a little bit smoother. And of course, Microsoft Edge has got to do its own rigmarole. Anyway, let's complete setup, whatever that entails, and I'm not sure what this whole thing is for. That's not going away, but okay. I'm going to change it to focus, since I'm not really one of those people that really wants to see the news every time they open up their browser to do whatever. I actually find it very distracting, but anyway, let's click confirm. And no, we're not going to sign into sync data. Let's close out of that. Finally, that little LinkedIn thing went away. I guess it's directed me to a welcome page. I'm actually curious to see what this is all about before I dive straight into getting my VM tools set up. Let's go. Okay, it's gonna give me an introduction to Microsoft Edge. More privacy? Really? Yeah, right. More productivity? Okay. That's actually really insulting to my intelligence, especially considering us computer geeks can see right past this. Okay, it's gonna tell me about like the new features that somehow improve productivity. I think a lot of these are included in other browsers as well. Not quite sure what Collections is, but it sounds like their version of bookmarks. I guess they are committed to keeping you safe on the web. That's quite debatable. Actually, I do wonder what happens if I go to ubuntu.com. Okay, yes, it will actually load. And it's committed to bring me transparency and control over how my data is used. Really? I smell a hint of false advertising here. Performance? Okay, I guess we need to test that. It's the best browser for shopping. There's coupons, but like there are browser extensions that you can get from other browsers that literally do the exact same thing. That's honestly a better solution than just using Microsoft Edge, especially with its data collection. Yes, it does actually collect data despite what they tell you. When it comes to Microsoft, you don't get transparency over how your data is collected unless you're willing to delve into all that messy legalese dubbed the privacy policy and then look at complex data logs to see what exactly is being collected, which is so time consuming and confusing to the mainstream user that most users will just give up. And that's a real problem that I have with Microsoft. But anyway, enough said, let's get to installing my VM drivers. I can see that the browser has changed significantly since last time I've seen it. Now they're actually kind of abandoned trying to create their own browser from scratch and are now using a Chromium base. In fact, I actually remember hearing that they were going to do that back in 2019, shortly after I switched to Linux, and I ended up finding it too little too late for me. But let's not forget the whole point of this video, which is to see, has Microsoft actually improved the Windows operating system enough that I feel I could actually use it as a daily driver? Or is it really nothing more than a mere facelift and just another thing from Microsoft that's too little too late for me? We'll get into that after I get this done. Which, by the way, another thing that makes Windows feel dated is that for a lot of hardware you have to install drivers, whereas most of the time on Linux, it's really baked into the kernel. If a driver's not there, first thing I'd try is updating the kernel. If that fails, then I'd try to find other solutions to get the piece of hardware working until the hardware is natively supported by the kernel, which for standardized pieces of hardware, with very few exceptions, is not a matter of if, but when. And most of the time it occurs if it's a brand new piece of hardware whose driver hasn't quite made it into the kernel just yet. Alright, so I've just got my VM drivers installed, and my VM display just scaled up to a 4:3 resolution, which gives us more screen real estate. But you know what? To make this look more professional and to maximize the screen real estate as much as possible, I'm actually going to go to Settings, Display, and then change my display resolution to 1366 by 768, which is my display's native resolution. I know my laptop has a crappy screen resolution, but it works for me. And now we have our VM display up to full size. So now we can spend time going and digging around this. But before I do, first of all, I've actually got to close any windows that I have open. Okay, and what I have here are my original 10 reasons for switching from Windows to Linux in the first place, which I mentioned in a video that ended up being a straight rant almost a couple years ago at this point. And I think it's worth mentioning that at that point I was still fairly new to Linux. Like I hadn't even hit my first year on Linux at that point. But anyway, I'm actually going to be using this to guide me along and see in like what areas that I care about personally as a Linux user, Windows has improved, disproved, or stayed the same. And then what I'm going to do is put my judgment in square brackets next to it so we don't mix up the judgment and the original reason. But anyway, let's go look at Windows Update. And by the way, throughout this video, I want you to keep in mind that this is a fresh installation of Windows 11. I've done nothing with it yet other than installing my VM drivers, which most people after installing a fresh copy of Windows, be it 7, 8, 8.1, 10, or 11, which is mostly the case of people building their own PCs, the first thing they'll do is install their drivers. But anyway, I'm actually going to go to Settings, Windows Update, and it's going to actually prompt me with updates, and right now it's going to give me the option to download them, and then here's a more feature-based update that it gives me the option to download and install separately. It doesn't allow me to pause updates, but anyway, let's let's check our advanced options. And forcibly rebooting is still there, but thankfully it's actually off by default. That was actually one of my main complaints about Windows Update, is that it would just reboot when you're right in the middle of doing something. And all for what? DirectX 12? And it does give me better control over update policies. Now, I'm not sure like how much the forced update model has improved because I haven't used this as a daily driver. And I also want you to keep in mind that this is Windows 11 Pro that I'm using, so not the Home Edition, so things could be different here for the Home Edition. But in my opinion, I think Windows Update has improved. So if I'm being honest, I'm gonna say improved. I'm gonna get my next set of square brackets started. So now I'm on notifications. So now I'm gonna go minimize my settings window since I may need to access it for this one. I'm actually not sure. But anyway, let's go over to our notifications tab. And it looks like I've got Focus Assist on now. Oh yeah, it's priority only. Okay, and it does allow you to see what you've missed when Focus Assist was on. By default, this only delivers priority notifications. I'm actually gonna leave it that way since I'm making a video. But right now, it actually doesn't seem to be annoying me with the number at the bottom, which is one complaint I had about the notifications, was that it was distracting. But anyway, I'm gonna turn Focus Assist off, and I don't even see the notification bar anymore. And there's my notification bar. Thankfully, right now, it doesn't display a 1 right there. I guess they've jammed the clock and the notification center in the same menu. But to be honest, as of right now, I would say that this is improved. Now, if I notice a distracting 1 appear on the right of the taskbar when a new notification comes in and then just stays there after I dismiss the notification, which again was my main complaint about Windows notifications and specifically Windows 10 notifications, I can't always change it to unchanged. Like, these two aren't final by any means. And keep in mind that as we go down this list, they actually hold more and more weight. So like the top ones starting off with 10, those don't hold as much weight as like the 2 at the bottom. I feel like the 2 at the bottom are really the most important. But anyway, now we've got to bloatware, which I want to see what's installed by default here. We got chat, widgets, desktop, and search. And actually, we've got a Microsoft Edge shortcut here. I'm not quite sure why that's the only shortcut on the desktop, but okay. Now, in order to get a clear picture, I want to look at the pinned apps and see that there's actually a lot of stuff installed here. I think some of these could also be suggested apps, which I'll get into later in this video. But we got to actually go to all apps and see what's installed. And wow, Windows 11 still ships with a lot of crap. I can't really see a change here with this behavior, so I'm gonna put unchanged. And by the way, keep in mind, I'm not gonna stick strictly to this. Like, I may go ahead and goof off and see what else there is that's improved or disproved. Like, these are just like my top 10, which I think are the most important to me as a Linux user. Like, these are the things that I want to see Windows improve on. But anyway, now let's get into suggested apps, which is another thing that's really picked at me and nagged at me with Windows that I absolutely hated. Which, yep, that seems like it's still there. Like, these applications are here that's not appearing in all apps, which only shows installed apps. So basically, yes, this is where they're going to be putting in suggested apps, aka ads, right here. And I guess this is another potential place. I might get into Welcome to Windows if we have time, but we shall see. So yep, another unchanged thing. So now let's get into package management. Now, yes, you do have the Microsoft Store, and to be fair, there are some popular apps in here like Netflix and Spotify, but for the most part, I find 90% of the Microsoft Store is just littered with a bunch of crap apps. And like, there's still a lot of apps missing. Like, if you go search for another browser like Firefox, nope, you won't find it. So the Microsoft Store is a good idea in theory, but in practice, it's just a bad implementation and people don't really like it. But hey, at least Windows now comes standard with a package manager called Winget, and let's just see how to use that. And oh wait, no, it's actually not installed by default. And to make matters worse, since it's a developer tool, you have to be in the Windows Insider program to use it. And also it's command line only, so your average user won't even know that this even exists. And it'll be very unintuitive to learn anyways. And by the way, I just want to say, I find Windows PowerShell very slow, to be honest, when it comes to like starting it up and running a command. I find, for example, the Linux terminal a lot faster. And even if I switch to the command prompt, that's a lot faster. And it's a lot more popular anyway. And by the way, you can switch in between the two by clicking this down arrow in the Windows terminal. Though I do like how Windows PowerShell and the command prompt are now consolidated into one application. I mean, hey, I gotta give them props for that. Now, I know some people might prefer if they're in separate programs, but I think this just makes the command prompt easier to find when I need it. But anyway, back to package management. If I want to install Firefox, here I am left out in the cold, forced to go to Mozilla's official website, then find Firefox on here, and then I'm gonna click download Firefox. And I know this says for Windows 10, but since Windows 11 is really just Windows 10 under the hood, this should work on Windows 11 as well. But anyway, I'm going to open the file, and now I get to answer yes to the UAC prompt, and then watch it go through its whole rigmarole. And by the way, I can close out of the browser. Like, this is a very inefficient and insecure method of installing software, because you can only ever install like one at a time through this, and I find that this method of installing software is just slower, like a lot slower than other more modern methods. And this method of software distribution, where you just go to the website, download the exe, run the setup, it just leaves too much room for malware to be distributed, in particular Trojan horses. Oh, and then I get another shortcut added to my desktop, further cluttering my desktop. I can open this up, and there we go. Finally, I have my browser of choice installed on here. So for package management, I would say unchanged. But anyway, I just want to interrupt for a bit. Let's actually go to settings and make this my default browser. We need to go to the apps menu, and then let's go to default apps, and then we need to find Firefox in here, and then oh, look at this, we get to manually change the handler for each type of file. So we click on it, and then we get this notice saying that, hey, it's fast, it's secure, and it's built for Windows 11. It's trying to get us to use Microsoft Edge. I'm not sure how it's really much more secure than Firefox, considering Firefox is open source and is a lot better at respecting your privacy. With that evaluation, I'd actually say that Edge is actually less secure, but I don't know, you may have a different view, depending on the way you look at it. And fast, that's very debatable. Maybe it's faster than Chrome, faster than Firefox, I'm not quite sure. I think at best it's probably about the same, but let's switch anyway to Firefox. And then we have to repeat that whole process for every single handler. So I'm not going to really do that, since I'm not really planning on using this for production use. Like, again, I'm probably just going to completely wipe out this VM after I'm finished with this video, and I need to get back to doing what I'm doing here. So moving on to stability. Alrighty. So I feel like Windows has gotten a little bit better with stability, to be honest, from using it, though it's still got a long way to go. And I also want to bear in mind that this is a virtual machine. Now, good thing I decided to use KVM, so that way you can actually see the stability improvements, but I don't know, that may change, so I'd actually say improved. And now let's get into the maintenance aspect. And then this is where we start to delve into the ugly. And that is that, well, despite all the UI revamps and anything else that may have improved since Windows 10, well, this is still Windows. So that means you gotta keep it maintained yourself, and that means in addition to keeping it up to date, you gotta have a good antivirus software for it, make sure that's always running, you gotta keep apps constantly up to date, and for apps that are installed the traditional Windows way, that means you gotta actually delve into each app and check for updates manually from there. You gotta keep your privacy settings in check, of course, and you also get to keep your drivers up to date, another thing you get to do on your own, and you get to install a lot of the drivers on your own, and you get to check the list of startup applications to make sure that there isn't stuff unnecessarily starting up. Oh, and by the way, maintenance will take a lot longer with Windows, generally, when compared to Linux, at least in general. Like when I still had my Windows 10 VM that I used just for iTunes, I actually found that I was actually maintaining it way more than I was actually using it for its intended purpose, which is for the rare case when I need to restore an iDevice with iTunes, which, by the way, is not available on Linux. So I would say unchanged. I'm just trying to say, before you get all excited, because it's a new version of Windows, a new user interface, this is still Windows. It's not a completely new operating system. But anyway, now here's malware. And in general, Windows is very prone to malware. Like, you need an antivirus software. The Windows package management system is very insecure. A lot of malware comes through there. And to top it all off, there's a lot of huge exploits with Windows. Windows has some of the biggest exploits out of every operating system in existence. If you've heard of the whole print nightmare fiasco, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I would say unchanged. And now let's get into the privacy aspect. So now for this, we actually need to go into our settings, and then privacy and security, or rather lack thereof. And then you get a ton of Windows privacy settings, like there's even the advertising ID. Oh, and guess what? There's even more telemetry settings that you're not aware of that are enabled by default. Thankfully, advertising ID isn't one of them, which you should really have disabled. Now, of course, I would actually go in and look at this and disable anything that you don't want. And if you're not sure how a telemetry setting would improve your experience, or how it affects your experience rather, I would honestly just disable it. And if you don't notice a difference, just leave it off. Why let Microsoft invade your privacy more than absolutely necessary? Oh, and then my biggest complaint is that there's actually a bare minimum of telemetry data that Windows will send to Microsoft, and you can't disable that, at least not without going into the registry or using third-party tools. And it says that it's to keep the operating system secure, up to date, and working as expected. Not really sure how it does that, so I don't really trust that. But at least you do now have the option to delete diagnostic data. Oh, it's only a request, okay, which at least legally speaking, they have to approve. Like if you say, yeah, I want my data deleted, they have to comply. And there is a way to view your diagnostic data. And another recommendation that I'd make is to use a third-party utility like O&O Shutup 10 to have better control over your privacy settings. When it comes to privacy on Windows, you can never really get there 100%, which is why I strongly recommend switching to Linux as your daily driver, if possible, if you really care about your privacy. So I guess if I wanted to be generous, I'd say it's changed a little tiny bit, but not enough to say improved. Even if I had a long way to go still, because that's an exaggeration of how much it's improved. So yeah, still unchanged. They really need to improve their privacy practices. And remember, this holds a lot of weight since it's at the bottom of the list. And now we get into security, which I should have led from malware. That's because it's so easy to get malware on Windows, so much so in fact that you need an antivirus. Even then, you're still not fully secure, even if you are fully up to date. And I also want to reiterate that Windows has had a lot of huge exploits in the past, so Windows is really a security nightmare. Now there are hardening tools out there and best practices you can take, like for example, checking your startup applications to see what's starting up with your system. But when it comes to security on Windows, you can never get there 100%, but there are things you can do to at least improve it if you have to use Windows. So yeah, that's another thing that's unchanged. And remember, this holds the most weight. Privacy is actually second only to this one. Now you do have things like UAC and Windows Defender, now renamed to Windows Security, to mitigate these risks, but in general, Windows Security is really just a joke, I find. And there's quite a few people out there that would agree with me on that. Like, if you've ever heard the phrase, there's a way around security when it comes to Windows, you'll know what I mean. But anyway, this is my final judgment call. Yes, Windows has improved a bit, and I have got to give them props for the new UI, which I honestly think looks better than Windows 10. A lot less clunky, a lot smoother. Now, I still have a bias towards the Mac OS look and feel. That's just a personal preference, so you really can't do anything about that. It really hasn't improved enough for me to actually use it as my daily driver, or recommend anyone upgrading to Windows 11 for that matter, or anyone using Windows as their daily driver. So yeah, I would still recommend, especially for those that can't upgrade to Windows 11, because their current hardware is not compatible, so if that's the case with you, you better listen up. Before you run out and buy a new PC to meet the requirements, I would honestly just give Linux a try on your current system and see how you like it. If you think it's a viable option for you, go for it. But of course, I do acknowledge that it's not for everyone. Like, for example, there's still certain applications that just won't run on Linux. There are workarounds like Wine, but those aren't anywhere near noob friendly. Like, I would stay away from those if you're an inexperienced user and just stick to VM or dual booting. But an example would be if you're one of those people that's really hung up on the Adobe Creative Cloud and you absolutely need that for your profession, then it may not be for you. But anyway, before I wrap up this video, I do actually want to take the chance to mention something that I didn't like about Windows that I'm actually surprised didn't make my top 10 back in late 2019, and that is Cortana, which is notably absent from here, thank goodness. Now, I thought it was gone completely, but if we go into Task Manager and then go to Startup, it is still there, it's just disabled by default. You can always right-click and enable it. Oh, actually, my bad. I was gonna right-click on the Windows terminal. You can always enable it here. There's Cortana even on here. Okay, it's basically as an app. Like, it's still there if you really liked it, so don't worry about it being removed completely. But I honestly didn't really like it, especially because of privacy issues. And to be honest, I don't really like voice recognition technology in general. Yes, it is a good idea in theory, but in practice, it gets what you say wrong a lot of times, and then you gotta go back and correct yourself. And then by the time it's all said and done, doing it with a keyboard and mouse, or for touchscreen devices like a phone or a tablet, by touch, the old-fashioned way, would have been a lot faster. Like, I think it's one of those things that is just before its time. It's still got a long way to go before it actually becomes a viable option. Now, of course, for hands-free operation while you're driving, that makes sense. Then that is one of the few circumstances where I would use voice recognition technology. And of course, there is also the scenario for blind people to be able to use computers, but if I'm being honest, if that's the case for you, Cortana I don't think is what you should be using. Like, there are better third-party alternatives out there. I wish I could give you an example, but I haven't really looked into it, to be honest. But anyway, well, I do like the visual changes. I think that this is really nothing more than a facelift, to be honest, and Windows 11 just hasn't really improved much from its predecessor, Windows 10. Now, I wish I could go more into depth, but we're out of time, and I think I've seen enough anyway to make a judgment call, so let's call it a day.
And that was my review of Windows 11. I know this video was a bit longer than I would have liked it to be, but that's just the way things go sometimes. And as you could see, Microsoft is forcing people, or at least home users, to create a Microsoft account. Now the don't connect to the internet workaround doesn't work anymore, as now Windows 11 Home requires an internet connection. In fact, the only reason why I was even able to evade signing into a Microsoft account and just use a local account instead was because towards the beginning of this video, I opted to install Windows 11 Pro, and that was the main reason why. And also, Windows 11 isn't even worth the upgrade right now for Windows 10 users. Windows 10 is still supported until 2025, so you can hold off on the upgrade till then. But now Windows 11 basically makes having a TPM inside your computer a hard requirement. And also your system has to support Secure Boot, meaning that it has to be UEFI. Now, Secure Boot doesn't have to be enabled on your system, it just has to be supported. And I know this because I didn't even have Secure Boot enabled, and I was able to install Windows 11 anyway, among some other requirements. And I'll leave a link to the Windows 11 system requirements down below. But regardless, the setup won't even let you install Windows 11 unless you have that TPM in your computer and you have a UEFI BIOS. In fact, the reason why I was even able to install Windows 11 in my VM is because I evaded the TPM requirement by setting up my hypervisor to emulate a TPM. And I want to say this just to let you know that while I was successful in getting Windows 11 installed in KVM, by the way, that's the hypervisor that I use, you will run into issues if you just download a Windows 11 ISO and pop it into a VM expecting it to work. And in my next video, I'm going to go over how to install Windows 11 in KVM. I think that'll be dropping sometime next week, but I don't know, because of just how much I've had going on lately, I don't know. I would honestly say, if you're planning on upgrading to Windows 11, or buying a whole new PC because your existing one doesn't meet the minimum requirements, especially if you're in that latter group, this is especially for you, so you better listen up. You should probably seriously consider switching to Linux. And the reason for this is, sure, if you're one of those professionals that really needs the Adobe Creative Cloud, and I'm talking like Adobe Premiere Pro, Photoshop, that kind of stuff, and they're just programs that you just have to have, then I'd say you're probably better off just sticking with Windows. But if you're like the average person, and all you do with your computer is browse the web, write emails, and write up documents, you could be a good candidate to switch to Linux. Now, of course, I would actually try it out, either in a virtual machine or a live USB, or even on a dual boot. I mean, hey, I dual booted for my first few months on Linux. I actually have guides on my channel to switching to Linux. You can find them on my channel's homepage. They're designed to streamline the process of picking a distro, installing it, getting it all set up, and getting settled in as much as possible. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. It can be good as a Linux user to do stuff like this, to basically be open-minded. But anyways, if you like this video, found it was informative, hit the like button, share this video with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment.